لا يزال الخير حيا لا يزال إن في الدنيا سلاما وظلال أخبر الأيام أنها في وصال قم بنا.
Do those with mental illness need more faith? Now before we actually start with the proceedings, I wanted to thank obviously the organisers for giving us an opportunity to discuss such a pertinent topic which is absent from many of our spaces in society, but also within our Muslim communities. And also thanking the speakers for being here with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet and pay our respects to the past and present. I think this is that was a special mention because we can't talk about this topic of mental health, mental illness without acknowledging the fact that our indigenous communities here in Australia are facing a crisis. So just to give you a bit of insight, in 2018, 169 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people died as a result of suicide. And the rate of suicide in indigenous communities is actually 2 to 10 times higher than the rest of the population. I'd also like to acknowledge anyone here with lived experience of mental illness, or anyone here that's a carer of someone who has mental illness, who had mental illness. Again, the statistics speak volumes when it comes to talking about mental illness, and I think it's extremely important that we acknowledge that. And part of the reason that it's not being discussed is because of the stigma that's attached to it as well. Our speakers today have a huge role. As an educator myself in this space and as a high school teacher, it's often the last period that's the hardest to engage because everyone becomes restless. So speakers, you have a massive task ahead, and I'm sure you will do an amazing job, inshallah. Just a disclaimer, if anyone here finds any part of the discussion triggering in any respect, then please ensure your own safety. Feel free to step outside, regather and come back in, and perhaps find someone to actually debrief with as well. Okay, so we're going to get straight into it, inshallah. I'm going to take my seat beside our panelists, and we're going to start today's proceedings with a short spiel from our respective speakers, but also we're going to have time for live Q&A. So I spoke with the organisers, and we're going to actually have on-the-ground Q&As directed towards the speakers towards the end of this hour. So we're going to start inshallah now, and it's going to go for roughly 40 to 50 minutes, and then maybe the last 20 minutes will be Q&A, inshallah. So stay tuned. Okay, so the first question I'm going to start with is perhaps the director at our ladies first as well. We'll start with that, right? How does Islam view mental health? So in 1 to 2 minutes, we can just maybe shed some light on this topic. How does Islam view mental illness in light of the fact that in psychiatry, religion and faith was actually seen in the 1970s and 80s as something which was a symptom of mental illness itself. And it was documented and reflected in the DSM-3, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. How do we view mental health from an Islamic lens?
So I just wanted to speak about, we have made some progress in regards to acknowledging mental illness in the community. We've moved, I think, past the point of, telling people that the reason that they have depression is due to their weak iman. I think we're slowly starting to move past that point. But I just want to mention that I do think that we still have quite a big disconnect between many in the Muslim community and the idea of seeking a professional counsellor, seeking help from a professional counsellor or a psychologist. There's still a big disconnect, especially amongst the migrant, first generation migrants especially. But even amongst second generation, many people I come across, they actually don't think to see a psychologist. It doesn't even cross their minds. And what I find is, obviously being a religious figure, so they'll been asking me about where to go for ruqya and things like that. But it's never crossed their mind that all that they're going through, all this suffering that they're going through, they never thought to go to, like, say, a counsellor or a psychologist to reach out and get some help. And some of them have got apprehension to go because they think that if I go to a psychologist, how are they going to play with my brain? And they have all these kind of ideas, you know, and they don't realise that we've got actually Muslim psychologists that incorporate, Islamic teachings into their practice. And but the problem is, I find, is that people, psychologists can't go out there and say, hey, we incorporate, Islamic teaching if they feel it's appropriate, so they can't do that professionally. So that's why a lot of people don't realise that, look, if you go there, they're more remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not just going to play with your brain or something like that. So what I want to say is that I just feel that we need to have better cooperation between mental health professionals and religious leaders, because religious leaders do tend to be, especially for practicing Muslims, religious leaders do tend to be their first point of reference. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this now, I'm sorry if I trigger anyone, so I'm going to say something a bit sensitive now, but just to give you an idea of what can happen when we don't refer people back to mental health professionals, and that is like I know of situations where someone might have had bipolar, for example. Now, rather than referring them to, the symptoms they're coming with, rather than saying, look, I think it would be in your best interest to seek out advice from a mental health professional, like they've been sent to ruqya, and then the person's exasperated because, they're going through a lot of trauma through going and getting ruqya done for like a year, and we saw some of the videos on One Path, what's happening, the consequence of that. And so I do think there is a lot more connection between religious leaders and our mental health professionals. But I was very happy, I just want to mention too, I just noticed last week, very happy to see an upcoming workshop for Arabic religious leaders coming up, I think, on Tuesday. Someone's running it, mashallah. I was very happy to see that because I think this is what we have to do. One more thing, and I'm going to finish up my part, and that is what I find amongst Muslim communities is still very existing, especially against migrant families. I find that people, I'll be honest, they would much rather that their family, their loved one has a jinn problem than acknowledging that they're mental illness. That is the reality. They would rather admit that, they'd rather tell you that, oh, my daughter's affected by jinn, rather than to actually acknowledge that, wait, oh, my daughter does have schizophrenia, or, she's got bipolar, or, she's got severe depression. Like, that's kind of like, you can't admit that. And it's sad, where did we get to? I don't know how we got to this stage, but again, it's like we spoke with all the other panels, it seems like we lost our way. And just to give you some insight here, look, can you imagine that in the 8th century, do you know who built the first psychiatric hospital? Muslims. Muslims were the first ones to build a psychiatric hospital within Baghdad, in Iraq. See, we were the forerunners, but for some reason, we lost our way, and now we're lagging behind. So that's what I just want to start off by saying.
Awesome. Thank you, Ustadha Jamaluddin. I guess I gather from your spiel is that we're talking about mental illness. We're putting it straight out there, and the stigma attached with mental illness. Now, I just wanted to take a step back before we talk about mental illness. What do we actually mean by mental health from an Islamic perspective? When we speak about our physical health, we speak about, exercise, and dieting, etc. But part of the stigma is that when we talk about mental health, we synonymously use this term with mental illness. So, what does mental health mean from an Islamic perspective? We know, there's definitions, Western definitions provided by the World Health Organization. But what do we actually mean by this term? Is there a term for it within Islam? I guess I'll slide over to Mufti Yasser to provide us maybe with his spiel, inshallah, before we move on to the other panels.
So, responding to your question, mental illness, is there any different definition in the Islamic scriptures or Quran and Sunnah?
Or mental health.
Or mental health. Yes. So I would say that since this topic is related to a specific field which has nothing to do with the Sharia, Sharia would definitely provide certain cure, certain solution if a person is facing mental illness issues, but it's not that Islam would define it completely differently.
Inshallah. And Dr. Zuleha, your expertise is to do with the inner dimension of happiness. I guess, would you like to shed some light in terms of mental health from an Islamic perspective and what we mean by that?
Okay, so can you all hear me well? Does that help? Okay, I guess I've got a confession to make. When I started my thesis on inner peace from an Islamic perspective, I really felt that the solution to mental illness was faith, and that inner peace would be attained when you have strong faith. And there's a lot of literature to, I guess, support that in the sense that, the qalb, which is the heart, the ruh, spirit, the nafs, the ego, and the aql, intellect, were all seen as faculties that needed to be developed. But I guess what I realized with time is that faith does help with mental, well-being, but it's not a be-all and all. We're living in a very complex society. And so we can't, the question for this session was, do people with mental illness need more faith? They need, they need to focus on their faith, but they also need to focus on other things. It's just like when you have a broken leg, you don't just make dua for it. Yes, you make dua, you do all the right things, you try to eat the right things, but you also go to the doctor. So when we have, mental illnesses, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, it's really important to go to the experts. I guess what gets complicated, which you're alluding to, is that the experts in psychology have a very different worldview of the human body, human faculties, to what Islam and Muslims do. When you study psychology, the notion of the ruh, the spirit, the nafs, they're not spoken about. So how do you, I guess that's where the mismatch happens, and we're very fortunate, as mentioned, that we do have psychologists who are to some degree incorporating the teachings where appropriate, if a patient is Muslim and if they want it. But this is a very new area and it really needs more research, more development, so that we can see how Islamic spirituality can work with psychology in a way that works for Muslims.
Thank you for sharing that. I guess, can I maybe term that as a faith-based approach or faith-based models needed to be implemented alongside traditional therapies that are currently being used within the field of psychology, perhaps?
That's right, and it's even got a name now, it's not psychotherapy, but it's very new and it really needs development.
I guess you have an MA in psychology. Would you like to shed some light considering, is there a dichotomy between speaking about mental health and Islam, or are they one and the same?
So I think it's important sometimes to sort of walk back and ask ourselves what do we mean. So we see someone who is manifesting a particular type of behavior, or they express themselves as feeling a particular type of way, and then we in the West define that, we give it this term of mental illness. And so, does this term exist in Islam? I don't know, and I think the Sheikh can answer that better. But I do think that we have to question that in and of itself, that is everything that we're seeing expressed and calling mental illness mental, right? Alhamdulillah, when I was in school, I had a teacher who would talk about how some children who had, I don't know called ADHD or bipolar, that one of her therapy practices was to take them out in nature. And those, the behaviors that they were expressing would go away in that environment. So there's so much that has changed in our environment and our food. There are external factors like relationships that I think sometimes in this conversation we are trying to be more empathetic and we're trying to include this idea of mental health so that we can have compassion for Muslims who are suffering from mental health issues as we call it. We should also ask ourselves, is it just mental health, or are there many other factors that we are now overlooking and trying to be expansive, or actually just being restrictive once again?
Thank you for that. So just moving to the conversation about, we often hear, the development of a mental illness being associated with low iman. Is there a religious basis for this? Is this a myth, or is it something that is partially correct or wholly incorrect?
I believe that we all should have this conviction that we all have low iman, and we constantly, every day, have to work on it. And one who claims that my iman is complete, this is one of the signs that his iman is weak. So whether you are mentally fit or you're mentally ill, in whichever state you are, you have to continuously working to perfect your iman every day. And the reason is, al-imanu yazidu wa yanqus. Today you feel that your iman is, mashallah, very fresh and strong, and tomorrow it goes down. So it is a daily routine that you have to continuously working on your iman. But weak iman cannot be a sabab or cannot be a reason for mental illness. Yes, strengthening iman or working on spirituality can be a cure for mental illness, but it cannot be the reason. There can be a biological component of mental illness.
Anyone want to add on to that?
Just want to say that I think, when we're talking about, we have to realize that faith plays an important role. I think sometimes when we have these conversations, it's either this or that. So faith is an important part of the conversation. But think of different scenarios. If you've had someone who's been living under domestic violence for 20 years, they're going to have mentally suffered no matter how strong their faith is. Or if there's a person who's escaped from a war-torn country, living in a refugee environment for 5 years, they're going to suffer from anxiety, probably depression. So I think we've got to realise that how much society affects our mental well-being. It's definitely our faith will help us, but we need more than that. And I just also think in today's environment, yes, we may not be suffering from those kind of traumas, but I do think that we've got what I would call we're living in a spiritual desert, and that has an effect on our spiritual well-being, it affects our mental well-being too. It's very complex.
So you're saying that faith alone would not work? You have to have a biological treatment or medication for that?
Yeah, it depends on the situation, but faith on its own would not solve a person who's got major depression.
But in many cases, it's possible that ruhani or spirituality or counseling would work without taking any medication.
Case by case.
It all depends on
case by case. But I guess the minute we try to say, well, faith is going to solve it all, if people who have depression or anxiety, they're going to think, well, there's something wrong with me. And I think that's what a lot of youth are going through. I do see the nuances in what you're saying, but...
and I believe the part of the problem is that many of our scholars or mashayikh, if they have some sort of degree in psychology, they are psychiatric or practitioners. They can easily understand that if someone comes to them and he is facing mental depression, so they can identify the root cause. So do they have to be prescribed some sort of medication, or if spirituality is the cure, or counseling is the cure? So if imams and mashayikh are psychiatric or they have a degree in psychology, it would be a lot easier.
So you're hitting on the fact that we need more awareness in terms of picking up on symptoms and also transitioning them to the necessary help they need, right?
Yeah, because scholars and imams are the first reference point. So anything happens in the community, especially in youth, if they have some sort of connection with the imams and mashayikh, so they come and approach their imam first. And if the imam says that no, you have no problem, or you just have to work on your iman, or you just increase the number of rak'at of tahajjud, or the only thing you have to do is pray ishraq, and that sometimes doesn't help. So if he is a psychiatric or he has a degree in psychology, he can understand that the problem cannot be solved just by increasing certain number of rak'at. However, it helps.
So back to Dr. Zuleyha. So can we agree here that faith is a protective factor against mental illness? And can we also, on the flip side of that, it's not really a risk factor, but it's a protective factor?
It positively impacts on a person with mental health. But the concern with what we're talking about now is if we have very limited number of Sheikh who are qualified psychologists. So I don't want us to send a message to the community that if you're not going to see a Muslim psychologist, don't see one. Because if someone has got OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or they have anxiety attacks every day, and there are established strategies in psychology that can deal with these kind of issues. So we really have to navigate in this area. There's a very ideal, which we should work towards, but we also need to work with what we have at the moment, I feel.
Sorry,
I thought, look, I'm going to be vulnerable here, which I don't tend to do, but I just want to do this because it might give some support to people here. So many years ago when I was studying back at uni at Western Sydney, what do they call it now? They changed the name on me when I got my degree, it was something else. But anyway, I met a sister there and she goes, I'm studying psychology, and I said to her, why would you study that? I've got my Iman. Okay? So fast forward about 10 years after I had 4 kids, twins, all this sort of stuff, a lot of stress in my life, been through some trauma as well. I actually ended up developing an anxiety disorder. And it was so bad that my heart would just race out of control. I couldn't sleep at night. My husband had to take me for walks down the park. It was just like, and I actually thought, I'm being possessed by jinn. I'm going to die. If anyone's nodding their head, they know what I'm talking about. So anyway, and then I was saying to myself, but wait a minute, I'm supposed to be an Islamic teacher. How could this happen to me? That made me feel even worse, right? I'm supposed to have the strong Iman. And unfortunately, when I'd speak to friends or people who knew me, it's like, wait a minute, where's your Iman? It was all like that. So it was really difficult. Look, if you go to a doctor, they just hand you the antidepressants. So that's when I realised that, look, if I need to work out strategies. I need to seek knowledge, like as we said, knowledge is empowerment. So I need to work out long-term strategies for myself, how I'm going to manage this. So it was through going to, alhamdulillah, Muslim psychologist that, alhamdulillah, she always mentioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all those things. And, she taught me therapies, like about negative thinking, things like that. And I incorporated it with Islam because, for example, whenever I would get that horrible, cold, pins and needles going down my body, I would start to recite Ayatul Kursi in my hands, or I'd recite the last 3 surahs of the Quran, into my hands, blow over myself, and it would give me relief. And I learned the science from her about how when you have that negative thought, if you just, say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem from the very beginning and just change your mind to something else, you don't give it the power. But once you let the, I don't know, I'm not that really versed in psychology as my colleagues here, but, if you let it go, you start getting emotion involved with it, it becomes out of control, and then when you can end up having a panic attack or something like that, right? So that's how I sort of incorporated my understanding of Islamic teaching along with the science and the knowledge I learned from the psychologist. And so this is how I feel that, you can incorporate, knowing that does really help, and, really when I recite those surahs, by the way, I just want to add, putting my full trust in Allah, that Allah is my wakil. He's my protector. I'm safe. Nothing's going to happen to me. I've got Allah with me. That really helped me to feel secure and safe. And, of course I did other things too, but I just want to mention that, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Jamaluddin, and thank you for being open about that.
It's not easy. I've never spoken about that anywhere, so it's like...
No, I think it's important we acknowledge that you've shared your own lived experience, that we can obviously feel empowered. And I think one thing I took away from that was the importance of guidance from a professional in the field that's obviously aware of your background. So then practicing cultural safety and also kind of reconciling that with your deen. I think another thing I wanted to kind of maybe elaborate on, using that as an example, if you don't mind, was this whole idea that if someone does suffer from a mental illness, they feel internal shame, as though that there's a self-stigma. Do we find that this is the case a lot? So we talk about, so if I could just maybe break up stigma, not just the negative attitudes that society shows to people with mental illness, but for the fact that there's also self-stigma, that people that suffer from a mental illness, start to think bad of themselves. Do we find that that's an issue? Ustad Nuruddin, if you don't mind elaborating.
So I think that is an issue that's not really unique to Muslims. I think actually outside of Western culture, a lot of cultures adopt that. My background is Caribbean. This idea that you're supposed to be resilient through hardship is very, very common in a lot of cultures. So that's not necessarily a Muslim thing, but just a non-Western thing, I believe. So I did want to just comment on seeking therapy in general, that of course, alhamdulillah, it was valuable and it's valuable to a lot of people. But even studies within the psychology field show that what is most important is not technique, but the relationship between the psychologist and the client. So I think that's also one of the reasons why there is so much bad advice sometimes in the Muslim community when it comes to mental health, to, you know, pray rakat or whatever someone is told, because the person doesn't know that's speaking to them. So how can you tell someone you need to do more dhikr or you need to pray more if you don't know them? So the relationship is also a big issue. That's a huge key in helping someone, is that you know them, you care about them, and you're willing to talk to them. And this is why a part of me doesn't necessarily, is not in full support of the conversation around mental health, only in the aspect that sometimes now, instead of saying go pray more, people just say go to a therapist. So it's the same sort of thing, just go somewhere because I can't deal with you. But having that connection where we can talk to people and work through their problems with them is really valuable.
Absolutely, and I guess it's not just about people having sincere intentions, it's also knowing limitations with regards to what you can help with and how you can help. So by extension to that, how can we, I guess, as a Muslim community, address stigma, I guess, on a scholarly level, because, you know, I think naturally we like to sheikh bash sometimes, which is unfortunate. But we also, you know, so how can we address it on that level? How can we address it on a layman level? And how can we address that on a self level? The whole idea of stigma. Yeah, if you don't mind.
So, sister mentioned that it is not more of a Muslim thing. It exists, especially the low self-esteem. It exists among non-Muslims, especially. I believe that it's more of a Christian thing, that if I am facing or suffering mental illness, that's a sign that God hates me. And if I'm doing everything okay, that means that God loves me. So this is not an Islamic thing, this is a Christian thing. Whereas if I am facing some tough situation in my life, that is a sign that Allah loves me. That's what the Islam teaches.
So that's a paradigm, right? It's exactly the way you see the situation.
And this is the reason why there is a hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that أَشَدُّ النَّاسِ بَلَاءً الْأَنْبِيَاءُ ثُمَّ الْأَمْثَلُ فَالْأَمْثَلُ. That the class that is facing the toughest time is Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. This entire class is Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. And then those who are closer to Anbiya, they're the second facing the toughest situation. And then those who are closer to them. So the more you're closer to Anbiya, the more we are closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, chances are that we will be put to trial. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about this phenomena, or this feeling of low esteem in Surah Al-Fajr. He says that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts somebody to trial and وَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَهُ, and his risk is shrinked. If he lost his job, he's not making enough money. So he thinks that my Allah he's dishonored me, he disrespected me. And when he gets a job and he's living a luxury life, he thinks that my Allah honored me, respected me. So this is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this ayah and he condemned this attitude. That whatever happens, it happens as a trial, whether good or bad. So a Muslim, especially if he is going through this tough time, keep in mind, especially while he is doing muraqabah, and muraqabah is very important, that he is not living in utopia. He might be living in utopia, but not in utopia. So that's if it's a perfect world. Good and bad times come all the time, and the perfect solution is that he, of course, after visiting a psychiatric, and if there is a medical solution for them, then he can take those medications. But at the same time, he has to focus on spirituality. When spirituality increases, 90% of the 90% of the situations is that he will be cured. And that is because it is mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا. That one who avoids my dhikr, remembering me, then he is gonna have a distressed life. Therefore, that if you are doing dhikr regularly, not from time to time, then you will, maybe the life is not better in comparison with others in the community, but it won't be giving you distress.
Okay. Any thoughts? Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mention something here, and ideally, everyone feel great about themselves to speak.
But you've got strong iman, you know, like how, you've got to understand there's also chemical imbalances people have. It's got nothing to do actually with your iman. Of course iman can enhance that and help you to get over it, but you can have chemical imbalances, you can inherit like anxiety disorders or depression from family members, you know. And I just want to mention something too, but keep in mind that even strong Muslims do get health problems, and one of the, mental health problems. And if we want to take an example of Yaqub alayhi salam, what does Allah Ta'ala tell us? You know, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. Now, he had so much sadness. His sadness was to such a level, his huzn was to such a level that his eyesight, like he lost his eyesight. And it shows you that, you know, when you're not psychologically in a good place, that you can be physically affected due to that. But here we have a prophet of Allah. Like, so you got to say to yourself, if this can happen to a Nabi of Allah, then who are we? I mean, of course it can happen to us too. So it can be a test, and I believe, in my personal opinion of why I was chosen for this test, is because Allah wanted me to help other sisters through it. So I'm grateful to Allah that Allah gave me this test, because maybe I wouldn't have been as empathetic towards my sisters who approached me with depression and anxiety. But alhamdulillah, let me tell you, when you live it, it's a completely different story, and you have a lot more empathy for people who have that problem. And again, when it comes to also taking medications, let me tell you, when it comes to taking medications,
I'll be honest, the Muslim community is very judgmental about that as well. All right, it's not something you want to talk to many people about, that you take medications. So that's another very taboo kind of area to go into.
Awesome, Jazakallah khair. And I think that's a big thing that you touched on, is that, you know, often when someone suffers from a mental illness, it's like we label them and outcast them as though they're going to be living with it for the rest of their life, and that there's no possibility for them to move up the health continuum to being healthy again. And I think that's perhaps also the stigma, whether it's internally or externally. Dr. Zulahi, you were going to say something.
I guess, the Quranic verse that keeps coming to my mind is where it states, "In the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Now, this is a very important verse, but it has assumptions. It has assumptions that a person is in a position mentally and spiritually where they feel that they could remember Allah. And I know a lot of people who have depression and anxiety, there's so much going through their head that they can't even pause to think. So they need strategies to be able to pause, to breathe, get rid of that chest pain, and then maybe they'll be able to remember Allah. So my point is, we need to always remember that these sort of these therapies, these treatments can help contribute to the betterment of people. And yes, there is a lot of stigma attached, because we think if you've got weak faith, then that's why you've got depression. But remember that when our Prophet ﷺ, they were exiled out of Mecca, he lost his wife Khadija, he lost his uncle Abu Talib, and that year is known as the year of sorrow. The year of sorrow. It was very sad that year. So I guess he's the pinnacle of humanity for us. But if he was able to feel so sad, we're meant to feel sad sometimes, but we're also meant to seek treatment in the environment that's possible.
Awesome, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. I think that also reminds me that one of the wisdoms that the scholars mention in the books, that the Quran was revealed in portions. One of the wisdoms was to comfort the Prophet ﷺ through his trials, whether it was emotionally, whether it was physically, etc. Is that correct, sir? And so going back to Ustadha Knight, Nuruddin Knight, in terms of this, we're throwing around this term mental illness very loosely, right? Someone use these words anxiety, we've used these words depression or schizophrenia, etc. At what point is someone actually meant to go out and reach out for help? Is it just when someone, for example, is facing a normal life event, God forbid, their goldfish dies and they become really upset, they need to go seek therapy? Not taking away from anyone that's connected deeply to the goldfish, but is that something that Elmo's connected to his goldfish?
Yeah, I think that is a valuable part of the conversation, and Dr. Zulaykha mentioned that sometimes it's okay to have different feelings, right? Especially in America, we are suffering now from the over-medicalization of every single kind of emotional issue, like Dr. Carl Rogers, who didn't really believe in any of this sort of terminology, because for him, what was most prominent was empathy, positive regard, and the relationship that happens in the therapist room.
So, sorry, just to take a step back further, at what point should a Muslim or an individual go and seek that help?
That's, of course, going to be particular. It's very tough because I don't want anyone to think that going to a psychologist or getting medication is this sort of very neutral, light, objective thing. It's not. And you don't know what psychologist you're going to get, nor do you know necessarily the effects of the medication. I think that and this is just going to be my personal opinion, it's going to depend case by case, that you sort of exhaust your options. Is it the relationship that you're in? Is it possibly the food you're eating? Is it the environment you're in? Is it your job? Is there real stress in your life that something happened that also makes you sad, right? And if those options, for me, if those options are exhausted and you're not in an extreme state where you're going to hurt yourself or someone else, then yes, then you have to go and seek medical assistance because there's nothing left.
So what I got from that was that if your life is being impacted negatively and it's lasting for an extended period of time and your relationships and your day-to-day functioning becomes impacted, then that's perhaps a cue to seek out a psychologist?
If you are being hurt or you may hurt someone else. But I guess in a sense I do also have kind of maybe a unique take on some of this because I think that some of the great art and some of the great writing came from people who were depressed or anxious. So there's a part of me that feels like some of these human emotions that we now feel we have to run from, that if we actually allowed ourselves to experience it, good could come from it. But at the same time, if you're suffering and you feel like, no, I don't want to suffer, absolutely go and get help.
I'm saying a lot of these actions are exhausted that you can go and see psychiatrists. So, can you elaborate, what are those possible options that he needs to exhaust them before he sees the psychiatrist?
Right. So I remember distinctly in grad schools, I forget what they call it, but it's essentially the Catholic equivalent of ruqya. And they were sort of joking about how ridiculous it was that people used to go and seek medical assistance for what they now are saying is schizophrenia by going to the priest and seeking whatever the Catholics call ruqya. But at the same time, for me, this isn't a laughing matter because there are people who are labeled psychotic, schizophrenic, and they are not being given help from psychologists. They don't know what the problem is. But because we said that, well, there is no spirit, like that's not relevant, it's not jinn possession, right? We've gone to the other extreme that no one even wants to go and seek those options. So I think we have to be balanced. Could it possibly be jinn possession? I'm sure sometimes it could be.
We agree on this that in a situation, if he's going through mental stress or mental illness, then those options that are available to him or her immediately, for example, working on his spirituality or getting counseling from maybe local imam or sheikh. So he needs to exhaust these options, and even if none of these things are working, then the next option is that he should go and see the psychiatrist. So it looks like that's what we're agreeing on.
I just want to comment on this. There's just a couple of things here. My number one thing would be to say is when it's impacting on your life, when you can't function anymore, like you don't want to see your family anymore, you can't pray, things like that, you need to go see someone. But I just want to also explain something because maybe Ustad and Nuruddin, maybe psychologists in America are different than the way they operate here. So psychiatrists are the ones who hand out the drugs, whereas psychologists, the psychologists we have here in Sydney, they work with therapies. They don't go for they're trying to avoid giving you the medicines. Let me tell you, they're trying to get away from the medicine. So the ones you'll see here, they'll be giving you therapies, knowledge, understand the way the brain works. It's really powerful to understand the way the brain works because it takes the fear away from, it takes your fear away of why your body's reacting like that. So I believe in a holistic approach to solving these problems like depression and anxiety. I believe that yes, you should be doing ruqya on yourself 100% because Allah Ta'ala gave us a cure through the Quran, but at the same time, seek out that knowledge because it's very powerful. But yeah, definitely we need to be using our Islamic, the Islamic tools that Allah Ta'ala gave us to cure ourselves and putting our trust more in Allah Ta'ala, absolutely. But use that science that Allah's given us as well to overcome, inshallah, what you're going through.
Thank you. Ustada Sulaiha.
So just want to make 2 points. One is I understand where it's good to highlight when a person should go see a mental health professional, but I think we should be careful with that as well, because someone may look okay to us, but I don't want to be responsible for that person's suicide because I thought they were okay and therefore they didn't see a therapist. We do have Muslims who are committing suicide today as well. So this is something we need to be cautious of. And my other point, what psychology is doing, it really needs to come together with the Islamic spirituality. Things like, OCD is very linked with waswasa. This is something that's in the hadith. So we need more research in this area so we can understand psychology from an Islamic perspective
And I guess,
much better.
I think Yaqeen Institute, they're trying to merge the two fields of psychology with research and stuff. If I can give them a plug, I don't have any vested interest, but it is.
Can I put a plug too? We're actually working on a grad cert on Islamic spirituality at the moment at ISRA, so it's in the making.
Awesome. So just going back to that point about faith versus illness, right? Because it's such a big point. I once had the analogy given to me that a mental illness is the equivalent of having a cover over your mind and your heart and any affecting spirituality entering and leaving you. Do you agree with that analogy or not? In terms of reconciling it, hitting it home and understanding it from an Islamic paradigm, can we agree that or disagree?
It really varies, and it can sometimes be that way. That's why when you say to someone who's got major depression, become more spiritual, they just can't do it. They need to get to a certain... It's like someone who's bedridden and you say, go for a jog, you'll feel better. Sometimes they just can't do it. And I know someone, this is from people I've spoken to, I said, you should go to Islamic classes, not for her depression, but she goes, I'm worried to go to Islamic classes because I might hear something I disagree with and it's going to make me question my faith. So we're dealing with these sort of issues.
Thank you for that. I'm going to open the floor very, very soon. The last question I wanted to ask the panelists is a controversial one. Hopefully it'll wake you guys up. This topic of suicide, right? Suicide statistics for 2018 were just released a month or so ago. Suicide is the leading cause of death in young Australians aged 16 to 44, if I remember correctly. On average, 8 Australians die by suicide every single day. That's 1 every 3 hours, roughly. And forensic psychology shows that 87%, and this is perhaps a conservative figure, as mentioned by the experts, 87% of those people had a diagnosable mental illness before they passed away. From an Islamic perspective, how do we view the idea of suicide, the notion of suicide?
Look, I hear a lot of things about this. If someone's committed suicide, you shouldn't have prayed their janazah. Look, at the end of the day, we don't know what their mindset was when they committed suicide. From a faith perspective, I feel that we, for the sake of the family at least, give that person benefit of the doubt. If they were in a moment of insanity when they took their life, inshallah, Allah will forgive them. And they won't be accountable. I'm not undermining that in Islam you cannot take the life. It's black and white.
Committing suicide is a sin. And if it is a sin, a person died. Everybody is a sinner. So we can't say that a person who died as a result of suicide is a greater sinner, therefore he lost his iman and therefore we are not allowed to pray Salatul Janazah. That's not right.
And just in extension to that, I'm not expecting that we're going to reach a consensus. I guess this conversation is relatively new in the Muslim space. I think, so just keep in mind that there's going to be different perspectives shared on the issue.
Okay. So I just want to share my personal experience. A few months ago, I got a call from the UK. This brother, he said that my brother committed suicide last month, and I'm very sad, and he was in a very depressive state for last few years, and then he committed suicide. I visited the local imam, and the local imam said that your brother is going straight to hell, and why did you pray Salatul Janazah in the first place? So he was very shocked, and he said, and now this guy is having suicidal thoughts. because of anxiety and because of depression. That my brother went straight to hell because of the sin. So I said that, well, if he was diagnosed for mental illness, and because of that depression, he committed suicide. So this is like shu'batun min al-junoon, it's like madness. Okay, and when a person in that state, if he whatever he does, he's not held accountable.
At what stage is someone not held accountable?
Well, that is of course between him and Allah. After he committed suicide, we don't know what was his stage when he was committing suicide.
Yes.
So look, most of you heard my talk this morning. We spoke about 4 different categories that someone could fall into. So look, the most that suicide can amount to is a major sin. Okay, and Allah Ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. So Allah does not forgive shirk, but He forgives anything beside that, it's up to Allah. In other words, Allah could forgive that sin. Like, so that person died in a state, obviously, of I want to clarify that, if they knew what they were doing at that time, doing it knowingly, not under compulsion of, I'll come back to that in a minute, but just that they did it knowingly. Okay, and they were in control of what they were doing, then it would come under as a major sin. What does that mean? It means it's up to Allah whether He forgives them or He calls them to account for what they did. However, if they reach a state where they didn't know what they were doing, and that's quite possible when someone's got extreme depression and they don't even know what they're doing anymore, because I know people who've told me, I get psychosis, I don't know what I'm doing in that state of psychosis, You are not held accountable, like the pen is lifted from you in that state. So it's possible that person, so regardless of whether that person did it intentionally, in control of their action or not, they're still a Muslim, they deserve to be prayed over. Okay, so you understand? So there's no reason not to go pray. They need your prayer. They need your prayer. Go and pray on them.
Okay, thank you.
Show the empathy.
Jazakallah Ustadha, Jazakallah Khair Shaykh. I think, and again, extremely sensitive topic, and thus the disclaimer at the start that these discussions can perhaps arouse feelings of distress. So please ensure you practice personal safety. What we're going to do now is something a little bit different. I think it hasn't happened today. Open live discussions. We're going to have roaming mics in the sisters section and in the brothers section. So the brother there at the back, and is there a sister with a mic? Yes, the sister over there. We're going to take questions. Please make sure they're relevant to the discussion, number 1. Number 2, speakers, please limit your responses to 1 to 2 minutes. If anything, I'm going to jump in and cut it short. Okay? Alright, who are we going to start with? Males or females? It's a tough one, isn't it? Alright, let's start with I think there's a brother's hand there.
Just wanted to ask, in terms of as a community, as a society, what sort of things does Islam recommend for us on a sort of community level that we can implement to help support our Muslim brothers and sisters from strengthening their mental health?
I mean, that's a really good question, and we hadn't focused on it, but one of the causes of depression is isolation. Like, this is proven. And Islam is a communal religion, so but unfortunately we don't always see this in our community. So the best thing we can do is not leave people alone when it doesn't mean we act as their doctor or psychologist, but just having that human connection may be what's needed. So without judging them, but being there with them, we've got that communal responsibility towards those people.
Jazakallah khair, thank you. Can we have another question? I'm going to get through a fair bit of questions. Sorry, sisters? Any questions? Yes, over here. It's going to be a long distance. Can you speak loudly, please, if you don't mind? Yeah. I'll repeat the question. So, how do you advise someone to pray who's got many mental illnesses, and when they try, they can't?
I can try. That's a very case-by-case question. But I'll give you an example. I had a sister come to me the other day in my class, and she told me she's had something like that, and she had a lot of problems just getting to the prayer mat. And look, one thing is if they haven't already tried to deal with the depression first, or the anxiety, whatever they're going through, that can be a block. So they do need to deal with that sometimes first to be able to actually get to the point where they can actually pray, right? But then also it's about, like, I'll give you the example of a muscle, right? Your muscle is so weak. So it's going to be really hard in the beginning. Just push yourself to the prayer mat even if you don't even want to go, you know? And just pray that prayer if you feel nothing. But, alhamdulillah, and she told me that when she gets into sujood, she feels good, but it's just getting to the prayer mat. So I said, look, there's a saying, you know, drag your heart to the prayer mat until your heart drags you. Okay? So just think of it as a muscle that, like, it's going to be very weak, it's going to be very hard, but just try really hard, and inshallah, day by day, step by step, with the help of Allah, it can get stronger, inshallah.
Also, inshallah, I might just add my 2 cents, it's not my place, although I think it's important as well as Muslims, we often kind of hide under the guise of having a good intention or being sincere in helping others, giving them da'wah, etc. But I think we also need to know that we have our limits in terms of our help, the help we can offer. And sometimes helping with a good intention and sincerity can cause more damage than not. So if someone is suffering from a mental illness that needs to be treated by a professional, then understand that your role is perhaps breaking down the barrier in them seeking help, or helping them get that help before they can start praying, etc. Allahu A'lam. The brothers have a question.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Imran. I'm a GP from southwestern Sydney. And I see a lot of mental health patients as a routine. I feel like because the community is here, I think one of the take-home messages should be mental health is something like diabetes or pneumonia or heart disease. So when we have a leak pipe at home, we don't go to sheikhs for that. We call the plumber. So when we're sick, we go to doctor. So I think we should really give that clear message. You know, that's we should go to the professionals. Also. And for sheikh, would you think of would you think it's a good idea for all the sheikhs to have some sort of policy or guideline or consensus about in what sort of conditions sheikhs should do what? Clearly, so that you all come together and so people won't get confused.
So you're talking about, sorry, just to reiterate the question. So what's the framework sheikhs can operate in terms of offering help?
Yeah, because because of the migrants community, normally they used to have sheikhs in the villages who are supposed to know everything.
Yeah.
They're not used to with that professionalism. So I came from Burma, the monks used to do that. They're still doing it. But now we have the professionals. So sheikhs are still facing these questions for everything. But I think they're also in very difficult situation.
I don't think that happens anymore.
Oh, really?
And sheikhs knows.
Thank you.
Sheikhs know where they stand. So in many situations, they definitely refer cases to professionals like you. So, mashallah. However, in some cases, because mashayikh also realize that small problems of sadness can be solved by dhikr of Allah and by ruhaniyah. And why not try that option? If that option isn't working, then professionals like you come into picture, and then you guys provide the ultimate solution.
And just hitting a bit of a spill, but again, I'm involved in a project now where we're going to be training up imams in the space of mental health. So working closely with imams to understand their role in terms of assisting someone with a mental health problem and crisis. So I think, like I said before, very easy to kind of point the fingers at the imams because they naturally sit on top of the food chain. But again, we also have to work together, inshallah, to merge this gap and ensure that proper services are set up. Thank you, brother, for your question. Let's hop over to the sister side if there is any questions. Yes. Sorry, Serhan, we'll come back to you. Yeah,
it's working. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, my name is Viber. So one point was made on the panel that you shouldn't necessarily try to cure every instance of mental illness because, for example, some of the best art has come from artists who are depressed, which I feel like that's kind of like saying a Palestinian should continue to be oppressed because some of the best art has come from them. Someone shouldn't continue to suffer just because some kind of good is coming at it. I don't know, could there be some clarification on that point?
Ustad Nuruddin, I think that was in regards to your point.
Yeah, and I'm completely fine with someone saying that. I don't want to suffer and I'm going to seek help. I'm just sort of trying to maybe broaden the conversation a bit because I think that, at least in America, I don't know in detail here, that we've come to a point where sort of every human emotion outside of happiness has been pathologized. And we have had great artists and writers who, I guess we would say now, suffered from mental illness. It's not me saying that we should suffer from mental illness, but that there are types of insights that we get from having different sorts of emotional experiences. But if you don't want to deal with that, absolutely, that's your right to go and seek help and feel better. I was just sort of offering another perspective.
I think it requires self-awareness, which is like some people know how much sad, like if they're sad, they know they can deal with it. And as you said, at that sad moment, some great ideas can come out, but another person may not be able to cope. So that's the nuance difference.
Awesome, thank you. Brother side, Serhan, can you just put your voice up? I think the mic's.
Do I have the mic? Yeah, I have the mic. So, first of all, I'd like clarification from the Sheikh, and then I'd like to ask the panel's thoughts on a certain idea that I want to put forth. So, towards the end, I think we established that severe depression indicates that a person has impaired sense of judgment, right? And then earlier on the panel, I heard comments that, Prophet Yaqub lost his eyesight because he was so sad. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam went through the Aam al-Huzn, right? So now, are we as Muslims allowed to imply impaired sense of judgment due to severe sadness on the Anbiya? Because we know that the Anbiya are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam never had depression. Yes, they had some level of anxiety, you can say, or some sort of a concern that how we will implement the task, the great task that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, after receiving the first revelation, when he came to Sayyidah Khadija radiyallahu anha, he was shivering. So that's a sign of anxiety that he was having. And then after some time, when wahi stopped for a certain period of time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Duha and Surah Al-Nashrah, where he was actually counseling Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that you should come out of this state of this depressive state. So Anbiya alayhi salatu wa salam, we can't say that they were at some point of their life after they became Nabi, were under depression, if depression is something that can affect their judgment-making ability.
Okay, so we can essentially say that the way we feel depression is different to the way Anbiya felt sadness.
Well, are you talking about, depression in terms of an emotion, or are you talking about clinical depression?
Yeah,
and the Western framework that is used to
is a depressive state you're talking about, or depression?
Yeah. I'm talking about depression in the sense that you do not know what you're doing. Essentially, the way we discussed it on the panel.
So that's Anbiya alayhi salatu wa salam were protected from this. They were masoom. They knew what they were doing. Their judgment-making, decision-making ability was never compromised.
Okay, so I felt that we need to qualify that because I felt that the discussion actually pointed towards that, right? And sorry.
Thank you. That's
point clear now.
3 questions, man. You're gonna ask.
Right.
Can't give you that many, man. We need to balance it out.
All right.
You can speak to the speakers after. Forgive me, Serhan. Jazakallah khair for those questions. Very insightful, and thank you for clarifying.
So you're right, the prophets are infallible. We can't, and they would not have gone through depression. But just as they didn't go through depression, they didn't have cholesterol, high blood pressure, like Dr. Imran was saying, but we take medication for these other illnesses. So I think we have to, sometimes we think, I can't deal with that because I'm a Muslim, but I can take medication for this. It's just complicated.
Yeah, I think the best way of saying it, they definitely had deep sadness. Yaqub definitely had such a deep sadness that caused a physical reaction in his body. But to say a depression where he lost his mind, no, because we know they're ma'asum, and so they're protected from making any mistake. So that's already very clear.
Awesome, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience. You did such an awesome job, mashallah, with all those questions. Can I just have a closing remark before the closing of the conference? Please bear with us for another 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. A closing remark with regards to the way forward from here about the conversation we just had. I appreciate that it's very preliminary, it's still in its infancy, But what's a way forward, inshallah? If I could just have a 30-second summary from each person. Starting now.
Okay, so I'll quickly go first. So I think we need to become a more empathetic community as much as possible. Ask more about our sisters in Islam. Be kinder. Try to step back and realise that somebody could be going through a lot of things before you go and approach someone and you want to just blurt out something to them. Try to be together more as a community. Come to events, come to lessons. You'll feel that more of the community support because you really need that. The hugs, the shaking of the hands, assalamu alaikum, all those things. All of that helps us to. It's been proven that if you've got religion and you live in a good, a healthy community, having a healthy community around you, they are things that are very preventative against.
Thank you so much, Ustad Jamaluddin. That was a long 30 seconds, but it was good.
Okay. I guess my academic background is going to say we need more research in Islamic psychotherapy, which brings together Islamic the psychology discipline and the Islamic worldview, and brings them together so that we can create psychologists, counsellors, social workers, psychiatrists who have the sensitivity of understanding the Islamic disciplines.
Awesome, inshallah. And I think that echoes, one of our community leaders who's a psychologist, I can't mention her name because I don't have permission to, but she was mentioning recently at a conference in Pakistan that, it was a comment that faith-based models aren't enough, so especially within the Muslim context. So thank you so much.
She's the one we're going to develop the grad set with.
Oh, mashallah, that's excellent. Awesome, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for that. Ustad Nuruddin, closing remarks, all the way from the US.
I think that it's important that the way forward or the end goal is to be more holistic, to not divorce the mind from the body, from the relationships, from the environment. That all of these things are factors and we need to look at everything. I'm glad that some things that were mentioned already that are also important to our state, whether we call that mental or it's physical or it's spiritual, whatever, that we need to look at all the factors and try everything so that we can be whole human beings, inshallah.
Thank you so much. And
from my side, those individuals who are not facing any physical or mental illness, just like Rasulullah taught us a dua, that Allahumma shfina anta shafi la shifa illa shifa'u. There is a specific dua that is related to mental illness, and that is when a person, Rasulullah says that make this dua, Allahumma inni abduka wa ibnu abdika wa ibnu amatik. So Rasulullah is teaching us that we first of all realize that who we are. We define our position, and in fact self-awareness is one of the procedures under cognitive behavioral therapy. So this abduka, I am your slave, we are creating self-awareness that I'm the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is controlling my destiny, Allah is controlling me completely, my body and my mind. And after that, Rasulullah said, Nasiyati biyadik. My nasiya is in your control. And the frontal lobe is actually the area that is responsible for our reaction, our emotional reaction. And in this dua, Rasulullah is teaching us that we should say, Nasiya, my Nasiya is in your control, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this dua is for those people who are not facing any mental illness, and I believe that if we keep making this dua every day, it becomes part of our routine. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will save us from any type of disease.
Mufti, thank you so much for that. And again, thank you to all our speakers. Inshallah, we can continue this conversation and utilize different community platforms to talk about mental health, to talk about mental illness, to normalize it, but ultimately to assist one another to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Jazakallah khair to all our speakers. We have some gifts for the new speakers that are on this platform, inshallah.
لا يزال الخير حيا لا يزال إن في الدنيا سلام